Hello again, sweet darlings. Before we dive into this perhaps controversial topic, let me just say two things. Firstly, I am not here to judge you. I have made many mistakes in my life and wish I could go back and do things differently before I met my husband. Whatever mistakes you've made or are making, I've probably been there too. And if you're still feeling like sex before marriage is a great thing and you're empowered by it, please just give me a few moments of your time to explain how I've come full circle from believing the same myself just a few years ago. Secondly, it's only recently in my marriage that I've had to face the long-term consequences of having sex before marriage. In my 20s and in our early marriage, I thought that sex before marriage was a good and healthy thing. When I entered the Catholic Church, one thing that really worried me, in fact, was how on earth I would explain to my daughters why sex before marriage was bad, when I still hadn't come to realize how bad it had been for me. But let's start at the beginning. Like all teenagers, my hormones were raging, I fell in love, and I wanted that first time to be special. Despite the best laid plans, it wasn't very special, and I cried, realizing that that was it, because for the rest of my life I could never share that with someone again, the first time. Now, interestingly, although my parents were relatively traditional in some ways, they were both of the belief that sex before marriage was quite important from a safety point of view. I remember us having discussions about how women in the past had married sexual maniacs or abusers because they couldn't try it out first and see whether they were sexually compatible. So although my father in particular communicated to me that sex was a beautiful thing and that it was a gift, it certainly wasn't something that you had to save until you were married. And so I didn't. And the reality of having sex as a teenager or as a young woman with young men is not glamorous or romantic. No one has any idea what they're doing, and most of the time I felt disappointed and used, and my self-confidence went down. In this world, this secular society that promotes and encourages this kind of casual sex, sex isn't a gift. It's a performance. Do you say the right things? Do you wear the right clothes? Have you got all of the moves? Because if you don't, you'd better go and read some Cosmo. It makes me so sad now to realize how much of my young life I wasted pursuing men and giving my body and my time to people who would never love me. Praise God that phase didn't last forever, because even though I still thought I was being empowered by choosing who I slept with and being able to pursue men in that way, deep down I knew that something wasn't quite right. Dating is exhausting, I told my friends and family. There are no good men left, I thought. The reality is probably that dating wasn't the issue, and most of those young men weren't either. Most of those young men were all right, but by making sex available before marriage, I took away any motivation they might have had to get to know me, to connect with me emotionally, or to take our future together seriously. It was no doubt divine providence that brought me to my husband almost 7 years ago, a man with experience whose heart had been broken but who still believed in love, who believed that my facade of empowerment and arrogance and self-confidence was just that, a facade, and that I desperately needed someone to lean on for a change. From the beginning, we had a good connection and found one another attractive, and as neither of us had any faith at that point, we saw no issue with staying the night. Now so often we say to one another how different our lives might have been if we had both waited until we were married. No heartbreak, no risk, no baggage from past experiences. Especially for myself as a woman, I found intimacy hard due to my past experiences. Someone once expressed it to me this way: the women these days are being all used up in that area before they get married. They've had too many bad sexual experiences. They become nervous about how they'll perform, or they outright try to avoid intimacy because in the past, it always ended up with them being hurt or disappointed. The risks of sex before marriage, therefore, aren't just sexually transmitted diseases or pregnancy, which are serious enough in themselves. But the emotional risk and the risk to your soul is huge as well. There's a transfer of energy that takes place when you engage with someone in that way, and you can't take it back. They have taken something from you that should have been given to your spouse. So I had to grapple with that reality early in our marriage. I wasn't looking forward to it. I was avoiding it. I didn't feel attractive or sexual at all, and I realized that I was afraid. I had the wrong mindset about sex. I still felt I had to perform, and I was so focused on that element that I wasn't spending any time thinking about how attractive my husband was or what his needs might be. I also didn't have the understanding of the marriage act as something through which we receive grace directly from God, and so together we managed to navigate it, and start again as much as we could do so. That experience of realizing something was very broken in my relationship with intimacy in my marriage was a good wake-up call regarding how to explain all of this to my daughters in the future. I now know that sex before marriage is hurting women and men, not only because it's against God's will and His word, but because it's doing long-term damage to the marriages they might enter into with the best of intentions. Today, everyone tells you that it's a good thing to know what you like, to try a few partners before you settle down. But the statistics speak for themselves, that the more partners you've had, the more likely a marriage is to end in divorce. Now, I can't tell you what to do, no more than I'll be able to stop my children in the future from going out and making the same mistakes that I did. But I can advise you strongly to consider this. Your body is a gift. It is a most beautiful thing, and whether you realize this yet or not, it is still the truth. Guard it carefully, because no one just goes around sharing their precious gifts with anyone who comes to call. You wouldn't just walk into a bar and send your dog home with a stranger. So why on earth would you go home with a stranger if you are? Be selective, ideally so selective that you don't have sex before you've made a vow before God and that man has promised to love you forever. Because that's a gift that's worthy of you sharing yours in return, and nothing less, and I know that from experience now. Also, your value doesn't lie in how men perceive you. Ignore that entirely. God loves you and sees your beauty and has made you in His image. I've said this before in another video, but I once heard a great quote that said something along the lines that woman is God's glory distilled into its most intense form. Another thing to consider is that if one day you do get married, what kind of sex life do you imagine that you'll have with your husband? Most of us would say that we'd like to have a really great one. But if someone could show you the impact that past relationships and past sexual experience will have on your marriage, would you still pursue those experiences? I know that this is so hard, because we live in a world that tells us that sex is great and freeing and you can do it any which way you want with whoever you want. Until you get married, of course, and then women clamp up and men have to beg for it. This is not attractive, it's not normal, and not the look that you should be going for. But in my own experience, this happened to me without me intending it to. Because I'd had so many disappointments and bad experiences sexually, when it came to sharing my body with the man who I loved and had made vows before God to love him forever in that way, I found it very, very difficult to be open and willing and loving in that way. Another thing to consider is when you're getting dressed and how you present yourself to others. Don't aim for sexy. Aim for lovable, kind, funny, and faithful. Now that I'm married, and even before I was, you really can't believe how refreshing it is to meet a young woman who is modest, who serves others, and isn't constantly dating. I just love it when I come across those women now at my church or anywhere else. It's really such a breath of fresh air. If you aren't feeling like you're ready to get married, stop playing the dating game. Honestly. You need a goal to be dating, and just dating and on is not a goal, and it's not healthy for you because you're setting yourself up for emotional disappointment. I've been in that situation and come to the same conclusion, which is why after only a month of dating my husband, I told him that if he wasn't open to marriage or having children, he needed to tell me, because I was 23 and I didn't want to waste my time if that was the case. Probably quite harsh and maybe a little bit immature or not particularly sensitively put, if I remember the conversation correctly, but lucky for me he was open to it, and we understood that we were working towards something special together from that point on. Marriage is an amazing thing. I want you to know that. Despite what people tell you, it isn't boring having sex with the same person all of the time. You don't get tired of waking up next to them. You help one another to grow and change in ways that you didn't realize were possible. And you're free to be vulnerable, to cry, to ask for help in a way that you were never free when you were casually dating or sleeping around. Wherever you are on your journey, I hope that you can remember that your body is a beautiful thing. It's a precious gift and you deserve to share it with someone who loves you. If you've forgotten that or no one told you, don't worry. There's always a new day and another chance to try something new, to break a habit or start setting boundaries. That's not to say that it's easy, especially if those around you think that that lifestyle is normal or good. But maybe normal isn't for you. Maybe you've got it in you to do something extraordinary and different and brave. to tell yourself that you're worth more than that yes, you are worth waiting for. Thank you all so much for tuning into this video. As ever, please do leave your comments, questions, and encouragement for each other in the comments below. I hope to see you all here again soon for the next one, but in the meantime, take good care everybody, and God bless.